What's fascinating is all those people for the last 2 years who've been saying ceasefire now. Where are they? Where are their voices? It's quite extraordinary that all those people who wanted a ceasefire are not coming out and saying, well, this is great, we support this ceasefire, and saying everyone should get on board, including Hamas. But clearly they're not, because all those people who wanted the ceasefire, all those people who organised these flotillas, are not interested in the Palestinians. This whole 40-boat flotilla, the most recent one with Greta Thunberg and all the others, they brought 1/10 of one truck worth of aid. I mean, that's less than Israel pumps into Gaza in about an hour. So it's not about Gaza, it's not about Palestinians, it's about hostility towards the one Jewish state.
All right. Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly podcast series. My name is Anaf Kalam, and I will be moderating today's discussion. We are pleased to be joined today by Ashley Perry, who is the advisor to the Middle East Forum's Israel office. He joins us each week to give us a top overview of the current events that are happening in Israel. Mr. Perry will speak for 15 minutes, followed by a 15-minute Q&A session from the audience. And if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to use the Q&A box or the chat window. And with that, I will turn the discussion over to Mr. Ashley Perry.
Thank you very much, Achnaf, and good evening from Israel. There's really only one place to start this evening, and that's on the negotiations currently taking place in Sharm el-Sheikh with all the major players on the so-called Trump peace plan or ceasefire. I guess it goes beyond a ceasefire, so I guess we can call it a peace plan. I think that's even what it's called. And the big question that I've been asked for the last couple of weeks is it a good deal for Israel? Well, first of all, it should be said that the devil's in the details. On the surface, it's a very good deal for Israel. It meets, let's just say, most of Israel's requirements, and it's certainly tilted towards Israel. And it is really, if it's accepted as is, it certainly goes against what Hamas have been holding out for the last 2 years. In other words, a ceasefire while Israel is still in the Gaza Strip. That's something that Hamas said it would never agree to, and release of the hostages while Israel is still very much on top of Hamas. Again, if it happens, it's extraordinary. And then going on to some of the other points about disarmament and that Hamas will not play any role in the future of the Gaza Strip, militarily, governmentally, management, etc. If all these things come off, then certainly it could be considered a major victory for Israel. But that's the point, and that's because of the vagueness. Exactly what does it mean, disarmament? What does it mean that Hamas won't play any role? What does it mean that Hamas will get some sort of amnesty, some senior members? Where will Israel be allowed to remain in the medium term? In the very short term, yes, it will remain in the important Philadelphia corridor, but for how long, and exactly who's going to run the strip? After, will the Palestinian Authority come in? Will it play a major role? Almost undoubtedly it will have to, and it was even mentioned in the agreement. And where do we go from there? But I think let's talk about some more immediate term details, and that is the really very high level optimism coming out from all the major players, pretty much, from what is going on, the negotiations from Sharm el-Sheikh. Pretty much all the major players are expressing optimism, and we have quite a lot of signs to base that on. First of all the major players are in Sharm el-Sheikh. Even Islamic Jihad and some of the smaller Islamist terrorist groups in Gaza there. It's not just Hamas. We now have Kushner and Witkoff who have landed earlier today and are there really getting into the weeds of the details. And usually they wouldn't come unless there was something really serious to talk about. Hamas, the fact that Hamas have already given details on what's been reported, roughly, quote unquote, 20 alive Israeli hostages. Well, not just Israeli hostages. They released a video today of a Nepalese hostage. But the fact that they're giving details, that's usually a very good sign, because that's happened before previous hostage releases. Israeli hospitals have been given a directive to start preparing for the release of hostages, as we've seen in every other hostage release. They go to hospital, medical needs, psychological needs, families are being met, etc. So the protocols are being dusted off and they're being worked on. The government is convening at some point to discuss the deal and to give the go ahead. And on the ground, we heard earlier today, Egyptian president quite sure who's going to sign and how it's going to be, because there's no way Hamas and Israel will be in the same room to sign the agreement. But it's certainly something that Donald Trump would like. There's even talk that it would be exactly the same time as the Nobel Peace Prize nominations are given, which speaks to something that Donald Trump himself has talked quite a lot about. He would like to have a peace prize. He talks about all the conflicts he's ended, and this, as he himself has intimated, would be the biggest. So the fact that he would be overseeing the signing of an actual peace agreement while someone else gets the Nobel Peace Prize, which most people agree he probably won't get, is something that Donald Trump, I'm sure, will enjoy. Even some of the more recalcitrant players like Turkey are showing optimism. And it's really come because Qatar have basically been given a directive by Donald Trump, make this happen, and Hamas have been cornered. They have nowhere to go except Iran, really, and Iran is becoming less and less relevant to this as the days go, even though they're trying to, obviously, as they always do, try to be throw a spanner in the works, trying to arm militants, terrorists. Today they released that they stopped Shin Bet, Israel's security forces, stopped a shipment of what was described as potentially game-changing armaments for terrorist organizations in Judea and Samaria. So Iran is always trying to play that role, but really all the other players, Qatar, Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, all the Europeans, they're basically all on board. And that's really the reason for a lot of optimism, potentially, for an agreement tomorrow. But we should also say that there are some naysayers there, which not to say that agreement isn't going to come, but there are still some important issues that need to be worked out. Some sources are saying that the optimism is really there to try and get momentum towards a deal. It's not that we're on the cusp of a deal, but trying to basically make it a fait accompli. There's talk that while it is moving forward, it's moving forward at a very slow pace. So what are the outstanding issues? Reportedly, one of them is the prisoner issue. Exactly who will be released, that's always a sticking point from Israel's point of view. Israel's been burnt, obviously, with Yahya Sinwar being released in the Gilad Shalit deal and then going on to mastermind October 7th. So Israel is very hesitant to release too many or any so-called major Palestinian prisoners. But obviously Hamas need a victory somewhere, so they've already thrown out all the usual big names led by the biggest name and the biggest no-no in Israel, which is Marwan Barghouti, who's currently serving multiple life sentences for being involved in multiple terrorist attacks. There's others, Ahmad Sadat, who was also a leader of a terrorist organizations, and some others. So it remains to be seen exactly what big names, because they'll have to probably give some big names and some people who are involved in some very terrible terror attacks. But Israel has put a red line that any Nukhba, which are the Hamas's special forces, who were involved in October 7th, will not be released. But they say that they will be, because there probably will have to be some flexibility on some of the other names. So we'll have to wait and see. As I said, Marwan Barghouti is the biggest name and is a very, very popular person. He's not a member of Hamas. He wasn't a member of Hamas. But he is extremely popular, possibly the most popular person on the Palestinian street, and someone that's been touted to potentially run the Palestinian Authority in the future if he ever gets released. Interestingly, it was reported that Itamar Ben-Gvir, one of the two far right parties in the Israeli government, has given a list of names which he said he wants a veto on, and I'm sure Marwan Barghouti is top of that. The other major sticking point is the amount and the timing of the Israeli withdrawal. Those who saw the press conference between Netanyahu and Trump, they were there was also a handout to journalists of the phased withdrawal. Obviously, that's not something that Hamas will agree to too easily. They want to have Israel push back much further. They would obviously like Israel to be pushed back out of the Gaza Strip completely, but that's not going to happen. But that's still very much a sticking point. Also, Hamas are wanting from Kushner, from Witkoff or other parties, written guarantees that this will be the end of the war. They are giving up their only real card at this point, which is the hostages, and they've been told that this will be the end of the war, but they don't trust those who are saying that, whether it's the Americans or the Europeans, and certainly not the Israelis. So there is talk that they want written guarantees rather than verbal guarantees. I'm not sure that will be given, or at least it won't be released in any public way. Finally, Hamas are still trying to gain some sort of victory because the agreement itself doesn't look so good for them. They're trying to get that picture of victory, whether it's killing some Israeli soldiers. For them, the most important thing that they could achieve at this point is even kidnapping more Israeli soldiers, and there are very few days that go by where attempted to do so. Israeli army have put out directives at all levels to make sure that this doesn't happen, to try and take all necessary steps to make sure that no Israeli soldiers who are in the strip could be kidnapped, could be attacked, could be killed. At this point, everything is very tenuous at this point. While all this is going on, or tomorrow at least, there is a Paris summit led by President Macron, which is supposed to deal with the day after, governance in the Strip, the issues which are more for the phase 2 of this peace agreement. It's something which is enraging Israeli officials because it's obviously taking place without Israel, and a lot of very unfriendly governments are taking part, like the Spanish and others. The big question is, will Secretary of State Marco Rubio attend? He is scheduled to attend, but there's a lot of pressure being put from the Israeli side for him not to attend, because that would give it a lot more legitimacy, and we'll have to wait and see exactly how that plays out. Politically, at the moment, I don't think this affects the government. Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich were critical of this deal, even when it came out, and they're still critical of certain elements, but they will not fell the government at this stage. They'll allow Netanyahu quite a lot of leeway. They've been daily updated by Netanyahu, kept in the loop as much as possible, probably not completely, but making him feel that making them feel, even arranging meetings or phone calls taking place on Shabbat, which is not unheard of, especially when it's to do with these types of issues, but certainly rare. And on the other side of the aisle, the opposition met today. All the major leaders of the Zionist parties in the opposition met today to say that they will give a safety net to the government if Smotrich and Ben-Gvir decide to bolt the government over this deal, which is pretty irrelevant because it's not going to be voted on the Knesset where they can give that safety net, because it will be voted on in the government. And I'm sure if it will be voted on, it will be voted on in a way that gives Netanyahu a majority, which will probably mean the full cabinet where he does have a majority. The Haredi parties, although they're not really in the government, if they're necessary, they will return specifically to vote on this. I don't think the government will be failed on this. The opposition is heartedly behind this, but they have said that they are looking at the winter Knesset session, which will open shortly after the Jewish festivals, to try and fell the government. Again, a lot of it is verbiage, a lot of it is words, because they don't really have too much power if this government's going to fall, it's going to fall from within, whether it's the ultra-Orthodox parties or the far right. But probably we are looking, after this deal, or at least the initial part of this deal happens, probably because we're now under a year till elections, the parties will be jockeying for positions, and the far right will want to leave on an issue important to their voters. The ultra-Orthodox will want to leave on issues important for their voters. So probably the days of this government are numbered, but my sense is it won't be immediate, it won't be in weeks, it'll probably be in months. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right. Many thanks, Ashley. Now to start, if a deal between Israel and Hamas is reached, how will it affect the other fronts that Israel is fighting on outside of Gaza?
It probably will end the Houthis' attacks, almost daily attacks, which are still going on, because, I mean, it depends who. That might not be true because the IDF will still remain in Gaza, probably not in active combat. Maybe that will be their excuse to bow out. On the other fronts, I mean, Lebanon, there's still, Israel takes opportunities wherever it can to try and take out senior Hezbollah military leaders. So that probably won't be affected unless there is some political movement, diplomatic movement, excuse me, there. Iran will continue playing a negative role. So they won't be, it won't really affect what they're trying to do. If this deal does lead to the disarmament of Hamas, that will be a major blow to Iran. But Iran will continue playing its role in the region and certainly against Israel. But it will certainly give greater momentum to perhaps something happening on a wider scale diplomatically in the region. I'm sure that's been talked about behind the scenes of a lot of, and it's left unsaid, obviously, because no one's going to come forward while this war's still going on and say, well, we're going to move towards normalization, although Indonesia kind of hinted in that direction. But perhaps once this war is over, and if certain other steps are taken, then perhaps we can get back to where we were before October 7th, 2023, towards some of those steps towards normalization with Saudi Arabia and other major countries.
Many thanks. Now, going to a question here from Barak Korkmaz, who asks, do you think the flotillas will stop if there is a ceasefire in Gaza?
Well, they're still coming and they're still arranging, even though it seems like a ceasefire is, on the cusp. At the end of the day, what's fascinating is all those people for the last 2 years who've been saying ceasefire now, ceasefire now. Where are they? Where are their voices? It's quite extraordinary that all those people who wanted a ceasefire are not coming out and saying, well, this is great. We support this ceasefire, and saying everyone should get on board, including Hamas. But clearly they're not, because all those people who wanted the ceasefire, all those people who organized these flotillas are not interested in the Palestinians. I mean, this whole 40-boat flotilla, the most recent one with Greta Thunberg and all the others, they brought 1/10 of one truck worth of aid. I mean, that's less than Israel pumps into Gaza in about an hour. So it's not about Gaza, it's not about Palestinians, it's about hostility towards the one Jewish state. So they will probably continue coming. Perhaps they won't have the legitimacy, perhaps they won't get the headlines that they got during the war, but I'm sure there are, the marches will go on, the demonstrations will go on, the hostility to Israel will continue, but hopefully it will take some of the air out of that hostility.
All right, thank you. Lois asks, is something being done about disarming Hamas? I've heard they are burying their weapons for digging up later.
Well, disarmament is something which is part of the 20-point Trump plan. It's not happening at the moment. There isn't a ceasefire, first of all, hasn't been agreed to. And even then, to the best of my knowledge, it's not one of the earliest phases. I think the most important thing and the earliest thing that we're going to look at is the release of hostages and then the release of Palestinian prisoners. I think disarmament, if it happens, is going to happen way down. Again, I think I talked about this even a few weeks ago, even a few months ago. The likelihood of every single Hamas terrorist giving up their weapons is extraordinarily unlikely. So there will be some sort of symbolic disarmament. There will still be a lot of guns, a lot of weapons in the Strip. I'm not sure exactly how you can even disarm hundreds of thousands of weapons. So I'm really, we've seen in other situations around the world, Northern Ireland springs to mind, the decommissioning of weapons was extremely controversial. Exactly how it happened, who was witness to it, was it all the guns, and it never really fully happened. So I'm not sure how it's going to happen in an even more complex place like Gaza. So it's not supposed to happen anywhere at the moment, and it's very vague in the original plan. That's why I say the devil's in the details. We'll have to wait and see exactly how that works its way out.
All right, thank you. Going to a question from Carrie Hillebrand, who asks, any idea as to why Turkey has decided to play a constructive role? Is any thawing in Israeli-Turkey relations expected? And to piggyback Jack Berkowitz's comments, along the same lines, Turkey announced this week that it is restoring flights to and from Ben Gurion.
Well, to the first question, Turkey involved the same reason Qatar involved, because of Donald Trump. Donald Trump's pressure. He basically wanted everyone involved. Turkey is a player, whether Israel likes it or not. It hosts some Hamas members. Its leadership is very much Muslim Brotherhood territory. It does have a say in what goes on in Gaza. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. That's why I'm coughing. So they are wanting to play a positive role. Before this press conference, or I think it was shortly afterwards or the next day, President Trump convened major leaders from Arab and Muslim countries who signed off on it, and there could be no gaps. I mean, as I said, the only gap really is Iran. You had Indonesia, Pakistan around the table. Not that Pakistan and Indonesia really play a major role in Gaza, but it just looked good to have Indonesia as the most populous Muslim country in the world, and Pakistan, why not? I'm not sure really what their actual involvement was, but again, why not? So Turkey could not be absent, and I'm sure that was worked on from the very top. We saw the meeting of President Trump and President Erdogan. So Turkey have an interest. I'm sure they've been promised something by the Americans. I don't believe it's necessarily going to be a thaw in relations between Turkey and Israel. We even heard, I think tonight, Erdogan comparing what Israel did to Hitler and the Holocaust, saying it's even worse than the Holocaust. So the language is there, the rhetoric is there. Yes, behind the scenes, business goes on. Even when they've threatened a complete blackout of business with Israel, there was a lot of, blind eyes turned and business done between interlocutors, intermediaries, and it wouldn't surprise me if flights return soon, because it's a major flight between between Istanbul and Tel Aviv. But there's no love lost, and no one in either capital will forget, especially in Jerusalem, will forget so quickly what President Erdogan has said and done throughout this war. But there is real politic, and at the end of the day, Turkey is playing a role. So I'm sure President Trump, just as he's trying to do with the Qataris and Israel, will probably play a role in trying to bring Israel and Turkey together at some point in the future.
Thank you. Rochelle asks, what would it take for Israel to enact the death penalty for terrorists?
There is a death penalty for terrorists. That's a misnomer that there isn't. There is a death penalty in Israel, but it's a very high raft. At the moment, you need all three judges in a military tribunal to vote in favor of the death penalty, and only on three occasions, I mean, I checked this a number of years ago, so it could be that it's changed, voted in favor. And you need not a majority, you need all three judges. So it's never happened. 9% of the cases, none or maybe one judge voted in favor of the death penalty. There have been attempts. I know Avigdor Lieberman's Yisrael Beitenu attempted to at least change it from you needed all three judges to a majority of 2-1. So it is possible. It's just never happened in the history of Israel. There's only two people who have ever had the death penalty enacted. One of them was Adolf Eichmann. So it's not to say that it doesn't exist. The death penalty does exist. It's just never been used against terrorists.
Thank you. Charlotte Martin asks, is Syria aligned with Iran now, against, or neither?
No. Ever since Assad was deposed and the new government came in, Ashara is very much against the Shiite axis, I should say, has basically pushed Iran out, is very much, on the other side of, Hezbollah have a lot of difficulties getting their weapons in from Syria, as they used to pretty much very easily, except for Israel bombing that route, obviously. But pretty much Iran have been pushed out to a certain extent. Russia have been pushed out. Turkey has come in, which for some Israeli military analysts or political or diplomatic analysts is not necessarily a better thing than Iran, at least in the longer term. But Iran has definitely lost a major foothold in Syria ever since Assad ran away, basically.
Thank you. Reaching the end here, but while we are on the topic of Syria, can you comment on some of the developments with the Druze in the Sawaida area in the south of Syria, and any prospects of Israeli annexation or cooperation?
No, I don't see any situation where Israel would annex the territory, even though there are voices in the Druze region for Israel to do so, but it wouldn't do that. It wouldn't be allowed to do that on the international stage. I'm sure Donald Trump wouldn't allow it. But there certainly is cooperation. Israel has said many times and acted on it that it will defend the Druze because of its long-standing relationship with the community. But there are ongoing non-proliferation discussions or de-escalation discussions between the Syrian and the Israeli government. Those will continue. I'm sure they will be signed at some point in the near future. There is hope that eventually that could even lead to normalization, but I think that's a little bit further down the line. Israel still is very wary on the new government, so I'm not sure normalization is in the offing, especially not possibly before some other countries, but certainly de-escalation agreement is probably on its way.
All right, many thanks. Now we have unfortunately reached the end of our podcast this week. I want to thank you again for taking the time to update us.
Absolutely, thank you.
Of course, and for our viewers and listeners, please join us on Friday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time for our Forum Roundtable webinar featuring Josh Hammer, Danielle Pletka, Lee Smith, and moderated by Lori Regan. As always, I thank you all again for your viewership and for your participation, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks.